I'm wearing a suit right now, and that's because I should probably be doing my day job, but I had a little bit of time to spare and I want to be doing this instead, so that's why. It's Rolex prediction season, and apparently that's what we're all doing. I get it. Everybody wants to have a go at guessing what Rolex will do next. Me too. I will be rating other sites and YouTubers' most interesting predictions. Also, be sure to stick around to the end where I dive into a little bit more of the conceptual logic that I apply as to Rolex marketing and product segmentation that informs my guesses and my ratings of everybody else's predictions. Keep in mind, these are my guesses. I could be totally as wrong as everybody else usually is, so let's have some fun and get started. The Submariner. Monochrome watches are predicting a titanium blue Rolex Submariner. I do not believe this will happen in a million years. Why? Well, there's a ton of reasons. One, Rolex teased the titanium with the Deep Sea Challenge last year. To me, that indicated that at some point titanium will make its way into the collection somewhere eventually. What I also know is that Rolex does not like variety. They keep a very strict and tightly controlled catalog. They do not want too many variations of one model and do not want models that cannibalize market from each other. Personally, I see titanium making its way into the Sea Dweller line at some point, with the Sea Dweller or the Deep Sea becoming the titanium line, making it the most truly of tool watches. Blue? No, not going to happen. In a similar light, we have Adrian Barker at Barker & Jack with a platinum Submariner with a blue dial. I don't see this as super likely. I don't see them throwing out the white gold blue sub, so you need to do something about that. It's a tough one. The white gold blue just limits what they can do in platinum. They always segment, they always differentiate, and that's why you won't see a white gold and a platinum looking the same. They have to look visually very different. He's onto something, but not quite spot on. Which brings me to ID Guy and Britt Pearce. They both go for different variations of a green dial, green bezel Submariner in platinum. This is a maybe for me. It's conceivable. It has to have a green dial though, and the reason for this is that there's the steel sub with the green bezel, and a platinum with green bezel alone and black dial would be not clearly differentiated enough from the steel model. So you would have to have a key identifier so people in the know that this is not the steel version but the platinum version, and that would be the dial. As to ID Guy's more specific dial variations with the 369 or the integration of the Explorer model, I don't see that happening. Not unless they totally overhaul all dials across the Submariner line, which I do not see happening. Overall, for me, the most likely prediction is a high-end Submariner that has a color configuration that clearly differentiates itself from anything else in the sub line. The Daytona. Monochrome Watches is saying white gold, green dial, green bezel Daytona. Adrian Barker is saying white gold, green dial, Serichrome bezel Daytona. Paul Thorpe is saying discontinuing the green dial Daytona and the platinum Daytona. All of this is in the maybe category, which to me means it could actually happen, or variations of this could happen. I think that for Rolex to release some high-end special edition type Rolex, something has to go out of the catalog. Discontinuing the current platinum Daytona 50th anniversary edition and then the green dial gold version would make space for a new special version. I do not see a green Serichrome bezel coming into play on a Daytona, but a green dial or green on the dial? Possibly. Additionally, I might see the number of dial combinations in the Daytona line shrink overall in the precious metal models. Narrowing down the assortment could definitely be a thing, as I think it's a little bit crowded with the options on the Daytona in terms of dial variations on the two-tone, the precious metal, and the oyster flexible versions. Britt Pearce, Paul Thorpe, Monochrome Watches, they all are predicting a movement upgrade, a size upgrade, more steel bezels on the Daytona. Well, yes and no. Maybe not this year, but I do think a simple basic update in terms of movement is possible. I would not expect them to go for a 41mm version though. I know there have been some sizing shifts in the catalog over the years, but I don't see this as the most likely upgrade path at the moment. I additionally don't see Rolex phasing in more steel bezels. Serichrome is the direction they are going. We'll see that in more bottles rather than less, and I do not see a steel Daytona with a steel bezel competing with the Serichrome model. Paul Thorpe also thinks that the Daytona will come in more colored oyster flex straps. Never in a million years. The gist of the Daytona line is maybe some movement updates, some dials disappearing, and a new high-end model replacing some existing high-end models. The platinum model or the yellow gold green dial Daytonas are relevant candidates. Then we get to the Explorer. Monochrome is saying full gold Explorer. No, I don't think so. I was surprised when they released the two-tone version of this model. I don't see the full gold Explorer making its way into the line. Could I see a two-tone Explorer 2? Maybe. Monochrome and Adrian are both talking about a polar dial Explorer or a 40mm version. I think Adrian is onto something. The 36mm is too small for many, and by discontinuing the 39mm line, there is a space there that is not being filled with a 40mm model. That would make sense. The question is, will it have crown guards? I do not see it having multiple dial colors though. Nope. Black is the only color you're going to have, my friend, especially in the entry level, and also because you don't want it competing with the OP and the Datejust lines. That's where the dial options are and will continue to be. Millenary watches are saying Explorer and titanium. Again, not going to happen. Like I said, for me, it's the Sea Dweller or the Deep Sea. That's where titanium is going to make its way into the line. Then we get to the Milgauss. Monochrome Watches is predicting a Milgauss update, and others are as well. This will happen eventually. This year, possibly. I mean, we've been screaming for this update for a long time, and the Milgauss is definitely due an upgrade. I think it will have the crown guards like the Air King, and I think the Air King was kind of signaling that something's going to happen, and it's likely that the next one that's going to be in line is the Milgauss. So that's my logic on the Submariner, the Daytona, the Milgauss, and the Explorer. And I think those are the 4 lines with the most likely major updates. So what's my logic on all this? Well, it all boils down to how I think Rolex run their business and how they stay profitable. Rolex is a middle-of-the-road brand. I've presented this continuum of tool to dress watches. The middle is where you find watches that are generally the most popular, most sold, and most accessible. Rolex has their 2 lines, the Classic and the Sports. All models within those 2 overarching lines lie within that center segment of hyper-accessible, broadly appealing watches. They only have two watches outside that narrow space. It's the Deep Sea Challenge on the one hand and the Cellini Moonface on the other. That's how committed they are to that narrow brand. Anything outside that band is not going to happen as anything but an experiment, like the Deep Sea Challenge. Rolex has clear differentiation and delineation of models with clear upgrade paths. Take a look at the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. There are essentially 4 entry models, 2 with a bracelet, 2 on a strap, each with either a display case back or a Hesalite or a sapphire crystal front. Now look at the Daytonas, 2 models, 2 dials. That's it. Now, what's the upgrade path for the Moonwatch? Well, there isn't one. It's steel or full gold. It's a jump of $21,000, $22,000. Now look at the Daytona. For $4,000-ish more, you get two-tone. For $14,000 on top of that, you get full gold on Oyster Flex. And for another $15,000, you get a full gold bracelet. And for another $25,000, you get platinum. There's an upgrade path. Yes, they're expensive jobs. 14 is not a small chunk of change. 4 is not a small chunk of change, but there's a clear path there. The Oyster Perpetual is steel only. The Datejust is the upgrade. Datejust gives you a date and the fluted bezel. You want full gold? You have to go day-date. It's a clear path. It's a clear delineation. Omega has the steel Snoopy, the Ed White, the Speedmaster 57, the 2 counter models. They are not upgrades. There is no clear delineation. They are alternatives and are competitors among each other. Omega would call this variety. Rolex, I'm pretty sure, would call this a mess, and they would never allow it. They want each product to be a clear value proposition, be clearly delineated in and of themselves. Any new steel Daytonas would be alternatives to the current steel models. Why would you offer alternatives when you can sell all of the models you already have? Having upgrades, yes, but alternatives, no. Alternatives also drive up production costs because every time you have an alternative, you have to stock different materials and different components. From Rolex's perspective, that's bad business logic. I made a joke once about how you can get the Rolex with the Oyster case with crown guards, the Oyster case with fluted bezel, the Oyster case with the dive bezel, and so on. Rolex doesn't muck about with a million different core designs. This is partly because of respect for their heritage, but it's also because of product optimization. The less times they have to reset a machine to mill a new shape, and the longer they can just churn out the same shape, the less they have to have of options in terms of bezel colors, materials, etc., the better. So in the case of the Submariner, for example, the steel model is black only, plus a few production models of the green bezel. Red bezel? No way. It's not on brand, but more importantly, red would also drive up production costs and also conflict with the clear delineation. Black is always going to sell out. Then you have the green, which they will tolerate for a little bit of variety. But another color, why would you do that? The option is black or the green. You don't want to split the market and cannibalize the base model. Conservatism. This is more of a cultural thing, but the fact is Rolex are conservative and respectful of their heritage. As a consequence, they don't stray far from their core designs. That's why some models don't suddenly show up in weird color combinations or materials. Now let's put that all into context. So a polar dial on an Explorer. Well, it's going to be cannibalizing the black dial Explorer, and it's going to drive up the cost in terms of number of dial variations. Plus, it's not entirely respectful of the heritage of the Explorer. A Milgauss upgrade. Well, that's a good idea, and that's why it's likely. It's going to lower costs because you're going to have an upgraded movement. It's going to shift the Milgauss back into the middle of the road where all the other models are. And if it uses the crown guard logic of the Air King, you're going to have lower production costs because it's more similar to another model that's in production. So what about a green dial steel Daytona? Well, offering an alternative in the entry, like I said with Submariner, no. Adding production cost? No. Offering a color that seems reserved for high-end models? No. Some people would then say, well, look at the left-hand dial green GMT. Well, good point. A right-hand dial green GMT would have been a clear competitor and alternative to the Batman and the Pepsi. But making it left-hand drive makes it an experiment that doesn't cannibalize as much. But it does drive up cost to some extent, but only on the bezel, because essentially the rest is just upside down. I've heard rumors of a right-hand green GMT. Personally, I would be very surprised having 3 options in the GMT line which are in base steel models. That's a lot of variety and a lot of alternatives, and more than I would expect Rolex to accept. Then there's the titanium Submariner example. Again, it introduces an alternative to the base Submariner that would cannibalize their own market. Titanium will be reserved for a specific line. So whatever Rolex does has to be seen clearly in the context of staying in the middle of the road, clearly delineating and segmenting of all models with clear upgrade paths and no unnecessary alternatives that cannibalize sales of other models. And finally, keeping option levels low enough to give some variety, but overall optimizing logistics and expenditures to the maximum. Those are my thoughts. What do you rate as most likely? I'm really curious. And also, what would you like to see even though you know they'll never do it? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, comment. Cheers.